Hey guys, what's going on? This is Matt Wenning at winningstrength.com. In today's video, we're going to dive into a little bit of science. Now, I want to talk about adaptation. So if we're training and we're doing it properly, we should be trying to all work on being adaptive to our training. This means we're getting better from the stimulus that we're providing. But oftentimes we may be overshooting our volume, intensity, or other factors. We might be undershooting them, or we might just be spinning the same damn wheel over and over again. These are three very common areas that we're going to go over a little bit today, but there's four major adaptation spots that we need to be at. And this one today, we're going to talk about stimulus magnitude or the overload principle. So like, subscribe, and let's dive into the topic. So as I started to train as a young kid, I just looked up magazines and followed programs that I could find on the internet. Well, the internet wasn't even available then. I guess it was more like magazines and books that I could find. And what I found is that there just wasn't a lot of science to be found in the mid 90s, early 90s. And as I started my journey to Westside Barbell, meeting Louis Simmons, training with a lot of guys that were far superior to me at the time, which is a huge thing you guys need to take away from. Go train with people that are better than you. Go do seminars from people that have been where you want to be. Because at the end of the day, it's very, very difficult to do this journey on your own and make insane progress. I used to drive 3 hours one way to squat and then drive 3 hours back, completely annihilated from Louis' crew. Now, that's what drove me to be a champion, was the fact that I was willing to do so, and it was just close enough to make it a day trip. But I think what we have to understand is that exercise is a very powerful stimulus and component to adaptation. The major objective in training is to induce specific adaptations. For most of us, it's getting stronger is the big factor that allows us to do the things that we want to do. If you want to jump higher, get stronger. If you want to squat more weight, get stronger. If you want to run faster, you guessed it, get stronger. For a lot of people, this is totally the case. Strength training helps in every endeavor. Even if you're 55 or 60 years old and you're just trying to stay away from osteoporosis, guess what happens with that? Get stronger. So the point is that I think we have to understand that we should be trying to adapt to our training. This means that our training needs to be as close to optimal as possible. So what's the first thing that we want to look at today? Well, that's called overload, okay? Now, overload is a huge proponent to training. This kind of means that we have to do something a little bit harder than what our bodies are accustomed to. Now, in the beginning stages, don't get this twisted. For a lot of people that I work with in my particular clientele base, they'll do just the warm-up of workouts for anywhere from 2 to 5 months before I'll even introduce compound movements, so that way they have good muscle control and they're already semi-athletic and comfortable with other easier exercises before we go to more complex tasks. It seems simple to talk about, but when you think about it, think about when we try to teach a kid how to read, for example. We don't teach them with the most complicated novel on earth, right? We teach them by explaining ABCs, then they understand letters, right? Then they understand words, then they understand sentences, then they understand paragraphs. And then after many years, they can read fairly well. The point being is training should be the same way. We can't start an overload principle with what the top level guys are doing, right? Like Hafthor Bjorgesson or Brian Shaw or some of the new lifters like John Hack. We can't jump right into what they do programming wise because it's probably not optimal for us. It's overtraining. And what we want to stay away from is we want to stay away from overtraining, which means ultra or hyper stimulating. Because once our body goes into a hyperstimulation mode, it's not going to try to adapt to training. It's going to try to survive from it. So I find that that's a huge issue. So the one thing that we can do for overload and change, which I want to talk about today, is we can increase intensity or volume, right? So if we're used to doing, say, 3 sets of 10, we could go 4 sets of 12, or we could increase the intensity and go 3 sets of 8 with a higher percentage of 1 rep max or a higher RPE. There's all kinds of different factors and variables that we could do with volume and intensity. And that's the most common one that most people change. But the problem is you can't build a race car with a screwdriver and a hammer. You're going to need more variety than that in order to get better. Coaches like Mevdiev and Bondarchuk were both very, very highly skilled at utilizing multiple exercises. A.S. Mevdiev for the clean and jerk would have 75 to around 100 exercises for the clean and jerk to progress it once the base technique had already been set. The same thing holds true with Bondarchuk. Bondarchuk was a hammer, discus, and shot put thrower coach in the old Soviet system, and he had upwards of 100 exercises to get his throwers better. Arguably one of the best throwers coach we've ever seen. And what I find is that what they found is that volume and intensity can be adjusted, but only up to a point. And then you're going to have variety. This means different bars, different pieces of equipment. Why? Because the body adjusts itself to the same load over and over again. And what I mean by load is how many more reps and sets can you do until that particular scheme is exhausted? The answer is not very long. So linear periodization, although is a great way to train in the beginning because it's easy to understand and digest, it also has great limitations because for most people that do linear periodization, they're doing the same exercises over and over and over again. And so what I find is that changing the movement tends to be a better stimulus once you have a little bit of control and ability in the gym. Meaning if you step away from a straight bar for 2 to 3 weeks and you come back to it, it doesn't feel foreign. Now this could take anywhere from 2 to 3 years. For example, when we just did a weight releaser bench this past Sunday, we haven't touched weight releasers in over 2 years, especially not at a 9 RPE. So what I found is once we got back into the groove by set 3 or 4, my body had accommodated to it. And therefore it was a new enough stimulus that it hadn't seen in a while, but it was also a different enough stimulus to try to adapt to and grow. It's the same thing we hold true with eccentrics. We post on YouTube Live every Saturday and Sunday at 10 a.m. to show some of the main lifts so you can get a little taste of what it's like to be on the Patreon workouts. But the point is that we're showing these movements and most people are unfamiliar with what any of it is. We were doing eccentrics, for example, and people were like, well, that's stupid. You're not even lifting it up. Well, then 2 weeks later, I'm doing 440 straight weight with an extra 50 pounds on the weight releasers with a full pause and a 3-second negative, and it's easy. We didn't get too many comments from that. The point is that your training needs to have a lot of variety to it in order to create new stimulus. So don't think of overload as just volume and intensity. Overload can also be new and not adjusted to exercises that you need to be starting to worry about when you're training. If a person is really good at a high bar, a low bar, a front squat, a safety bar squat, a squat on a box, a squat free, a squat narrow, and a squat wide, that person's ability to get better is far outweighing someone that trains only in one position. And when they get out of that position, they're not strong at all, or they're mediocre at best. This is what you find with people that train linear, and this is what you find with people that when they get out of their comfort zone, they're not any good. And I feel like if we're trying to transfer strength training, we probably need variety. So I've ranted on and on about this, but what I want you guys to understand is we can overload in different ways. So this is part 1 of adaptation as the main law of training. Hope you got a little bit out of it, and it hopes to start to turn your wheels into training a little bit smarter so you can last longer and see your true potential. This is Matt Wenning at winningstrength.com.
Hey, this is Gunnar Peterson. I'm a friend of Matt Wenning's, and I've worked with Matt Wenning, and I've been honored to share a stage with Matt Wenning, and I want to tell you this. His programming is second to none. Oh, yeah, none. I bring myself into that too, but his programming is phenomenal. His Wenning warm-up changed the game in warm-ups, and honestly, if I'm looking for an online program and I need to mix it up, I'm calling Matt Wenning.